Welcome back to the Destination Dream Job podcast. Today, I would like to welcome Martina Wall. She is a dedicated self-love guide who empowers women to reconnect with their divine feminine power and embody their true essence. Through her transformative women's circles, healing retreats, and a range of holistic practices, Martina creates sacred spaces where women can heal, grow, and rise into their full potential. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so my first question is I know that we wanted to talk about confidence and self-love, and I think that's such an important topic. So, but first I thought we should define, what does confidence and self-love mean, and why do you think that they're important in our personal and professional life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel as though especially when we're talking about our careers, and how we show up for work, I think confidence and self-love really just are the kind of the grounding force that drives all that. Because I've experienced myself through my own journey that if my confidence was shattered or really low, or my self-love, I wasn't taking care of myself, like physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, then I wasn't showing up for anything else in life as I should. So I wasn't showing up for my work as I wanted to or should. I wasn't showing up for relationships or, being a mother as a parent. So really all the elements of life that we show up for, if we're not first taking care of our own self-love and really, doing the work to build our confidence into becoming our best versions of ourselves, then I find all those other pieces are kind of in lack because we're not able to kind of take care of that core element, which is ourself. If we're not taking care of ourselves first, then everything else kind of doesn't go as well as it could as if we were showing up more for ourselves, right? So
Absolutely. Yeah. And this episode is going to come out right after the Christmas break. And so I think this is a perfect time to talk about this because Christmas can be so filled with family gatherings and all these
yeah.
different things that we pack into these, short time that we have off. And so I really think this will be a timely conversation. Do you think that confidence and self-love are separate things, or are they connected, fully connected?
I do think they're connected to some degree. Like I think without one, it's hard to have the other. Um, so I do really think that you can't have one and not the other. Like I think they do kind of go hand in hand, but I think as life throws things at us, those things can, your confidence can be, shattered a little bit or lowered a little bit if some kind of situation is bringing you down. But then I think it's going back to that self-love piece and rooting back down to these, small practices or small things you can do to kind of improve those things. Because as you improve your kind of mental capacity for, a situation that maybe had lowered your confidence, then going back to those practices of self-love, whatever that looks like for you, is going to help you to then, pick yourself up and build yourself back up to that confident person you want to show up as.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we all struggle with confidence in one
Yeah.
way or, sometimes in our life, whether we're in a toxic work environment or, something happens in our
Yeah.
home life. So what can we do to help, build that confidence? Or some people just don't like have it because of childhood trauma or something like
Oh,
that, something
absolutely.
that they need to work on. So what can we do to start building that confidence and really starting to like live our life more authentically?
Yeah. I think that, a lot of people will, when we're trying to kind of come back from that place or build our confidence, I think for myself, at least in my own experiences and a lot of my clients, it's coming back to that piece of um, really doing the mindset work. I think mindset work is so important when it comes to both of these topics we're talking about today, when it comes to really believing in yourself in a way that, and doing that work every day. Like I know, like for me, some people aren't a fan, but I'm a really big fan of affirmation work. So for me, really showing up in a way that I'm constantly working on my confidence from a mindset perspective of really, repeating those affirmations every day for myself, having them written down like on a home screen on your phone or on your desktop of your computer, and really living in that space where you can cultivate that confidence everywhere you look. I've had seasons where, and that's the thing I kind of want to touch on too, is that just because I am so passionate about this doesn't mean that I don't struggle with this too. And I think that's a common misperception that people have, is that if you are confident, you're always going to be confident, or you're always going to be in that space, right? And I think that's the message, is that even you can be the most confident person in the world, but there will be moments or seasons in your life where you're not going to feel that way. And I think it's holding space for yourself to know that that's normal. But it's the reminders of, in those seasons, to really do that extra work to make sure that you're being surrounded by, number one, people that lift you up, being supported by yourself, of like doing the different things that help you to kind of have that more positive mindset. I'll go through seasons where I'll have post-it notes on my mirror that are reminding me of, wait a minute, you are enough, you are worthy, because I think if we can really sink into almost a depression or a really sad season, and then, when you're in that season, how are you showing up for work? How are you showing up for your relationships? All of those things kind of suffer because of your own suffering. So it's kind of important to have the perspective of like noticing when those things are happening, and being able to actually have the practices that work for you to help improve them.
Yeah, that's so funny because when I was younger, I always thought like in my early 20s, I'd be like,
Yeah.
well, just read this book about confidence. And then I'll like, you'll hear that one thing. People always talk about that one thing that's going to change your life. And then
Yeah.
I'll just be there, right? Like that thing will change my life and then
Yes.
it will be forever changed. But I
Yeah.
think what I didn't understand, and maybe it was just like my own misconception, or maybe it was the books I was reading at the time, I don't know,
Yeah.
but I think that it's not a one-time strategy, right? It's not something that you
No.
do once. It's
No.
not something where like, oh, my life is going to change. I'm going to read this one word and I'm be like, oh my God, my whole life has changed. Like,
Yeah.
yes, that might have like been like the spark that changed it, but I think what people don't talk about as much is that journey that goes after
Yeah.
that moment, right? We might have that moment and then what's the journey after that? Because it's always ongoing. It's always something we're working on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the evolution of what works for us in that moment, or what is that pivoting moment that changes the trajectory of our lives per se, is always changing. Like it's, and something that may have worked for you at the start of your journey of trying to build confidence and self-love, you've grown past that. And so you have to still keep learning and growing and using different tools. Um, and that's been the beautiful part I know about my own personal journey, is that I started out, like, let's say, for example, like yoga was a big thing for me, of my own self-care, self-love. It was a really pivotal moment for me, but then, that's still a part of my practices, but I've evolved and kind of grown into different practices that work better for me now. So yeah, it's an evolution of what works for us in that moment, and what that changing thing is. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So you've mentioned a few times about the different practices. You talked about self-love practices and
Yeah.
affirmations. Do you have any that you want to share with us that people could start practicing, this year in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's been a common theme that comes up, is either working with mothers or people who are, full-time career women or men. And I think for me, it's the short practices. It's tiny little moments of time that you can carve out of your schedule. Um, I'm a big believer in like really managing your time effectively. um, and really incorporating those little moments into your day. Like in my programs, and some of the things that I help people with, is just like carving out 15 minutes a day for yourself. So I call them like my magical morning minutes. So what those are is I try and help people, guide them into like really taking a look at the 7 areas of their self-care, and really looking at how are you taking care of your physical self-care, and how can you incorporate just 5 minutes of that. I know a lot of people that I'll talk to, they'll think, oh, well, that's a waste of time doing something physical for 5 minutes. But what's the alternative? Not having any time to do it. So, for me, I've done I have a lot of free videos on YouTube that I'm happy to share too. Like 5 minute sitting in your chair stretching. So like just spending 5 minutes doing some mindful movement at your desk in between meetings, or in between, stuff like that. That doesn't have to take very long, but it can have a really great impact on your mental awareness, your mental health. That's going to help you to still be that confident person, and still taking those little moments of self-love. So I love taking the movement breaks. Like I think that's really important. I know in my own work day. And aside from that, I think it's just keep trying things. Like I know I'll have seasons where I'm a big journaler, so I'll do gratitude journaling. And that really helps to shift my mindset into really coming from a place of gratitude. And like I mentioned, the practices of either yoga or just keep trying things. Like I'll have practices of I like cleansing my space a lot, so like I'll either use a spray or a smudge or like using sage or those type of practices too, if you're more in the spiritual side of things, where that helps you to feel more grounded and centered. Yeah, like there's a lot. And I think my biggest takeaway for people is just to keep trying different things, and also be around communities or people that are going to help to inspire you to, oh, this is what I do and this is really helpful, because community is such a big part of it too. A lot of remote work is happening these days and people can feel really isolated and alone. So I think finding either online communities or reaching out to your like in-person communities on different spaces that kind of give you permission to try out different things that you maybe wouldn't have tried before. So yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a little more personal to each person, kind of what
Yeah,
helps
absolutely.
them. Yeah, what helps them
Yeah.
feel better for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, what are the 7 areas of self-care? I did not know there were seven, and now I need to know what the seven are.
Yeah, let's see if I can remember them all. So environmental, so that's like your home, like if it's well looked after and kind of, feels like a cozy space for yourself. Because if lots of people, if you're surrounded by clutter and like mess all the time, then that also brings down your mental health, right? So environmental, financial, spiritual, mental, emotional, and I'm missing two. What's the other two? I didn't have my thing in front of me. It's been a while since I've gone through it for myself. Um, I'm gonna draw a blank on the last two.
Okay, just a
Environmental.
minute. I'm looking it up. Mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, recreational, and
Oh, yeah.
social.
There we go. Yeah. There we go.
Cool. I did not, Kate. That's just like, but when I see that, when I see 7 areas of self-care, and I don't know if anyone listening can relate, I feel overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed?
Like,
Yeah,
I feel like
absolutely.
that's too many areas
Yeah.
of self-care. I can't
I
even do
know.
like one of those in a day. So how am I
Yeah.
supposed to do seven? So do you
Well,
have any
yeah, like
tips?
totally. And that's definitely exactly the feeling that comes up. Like when I first kind of initiate work with my clients, we'll take a look at that. Like it's actually ends up being a wheel, and each wheel has like 7 spokes to it in each area. So like we'll take a look at, you'll rate yourself. Like you'll rate yourself this week or today of like what is your, social self-care on a rating from 0 meaning there's none, or 10 meaning there's a lot or abundance of it. And rating each of those areas and then coming back to one. What is the one that you feel like you're lacking in the most right now? And that's where you start. You kind of erase the rest out of your mind and just focus on that one. Because yeah, otherwise you will just do none of it because you're overwhelmed and it feels like too much work.
Right. That makes more
Yeah.
sense. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, because if you think of it more like a pie chart, I'm like a
Yeah.
pie chart person, right? So like some of
Totally.
them will
Yeah.
be like bigger, more full, whereas other
Yes.
ones are like really small. And so you're
Exactly.
like, maybe, I don't know. I'm really good at recreational, so I was gonna pick on that one, but let's say
Yeah.
environmental. I'm not very good at cleaning my house. So I just hired cleaners because I can't handle cleaning my own house.
There you go. Yeah.
And so that would be an example, right, of self-care
Oh,
in the
totally.
environmental space. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, that makes sense. I get that. So I that makes
Yeah.
more
So
sense. It's more
then,
handleable now. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. It doesn't have to be scary.
Yeah, I was like all seven. I don't have time for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Too busy for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. What about imposter syndrome? I mean, we all face it at some point, especially when we try something new or like us, jumping into business or people starting a new
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for people, going through imposter syndrome and really how they can build their confidence and in that
Yeah.
space?
No, imposter syndrome's a huge one. And it comes up, I know it comes up for myself a lot. So I think it's for me, I guess strategies that I've used that have helped me get over that is that I have to keep reminding myself that I am my own authentic version of whatever it is I'm doing. So let's say I'll just use something that I do as example. So doing women's circles, I've been surrounded by a lot of amazing mentors and people who I've gone to their spaces, and I think it creeps in. For me, I think the first thing that starts to creep in is like that not feeling good enough, not feeling, someone else does it better than you. And I think we can apply this to all areas of our careers, when in using my example. But I think the biggest thing for me is, as hard as it can be, it's really taking the time, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but think of it as you're going through your life, is going back to that inner child healing. I think that's a big part of imposter syndrome is, I know for myself growing up, it's like there was always that little voice in my head saying I wasn't good enough, or everyone else was better than me at certain things. And as I kind of was able to do a lot of kind of rooting down to like, where is this coming from? So I have, different practices that I've helped people with to kind of go back to, when they're having a feeling coming up of imposter syndrome of like, okay, take a look back at your life. When has this been a theme? So kind of doing that lifeline, or like that lifeline of figuring out in your life, where have these themes come up? And a lot of times it stems back to how we felt as a child. So the inner child work, I think, is so important when we're looking at imposter syndrome. And I know that can feel overwhelming too, because it's like, I don't want to dig up these things that I've buried deep inside. But I think that's a big part of imposter syndrome, is where we grew up, or how we felt about ourselves, and when that kind of changed. Because of course, as very small children, we had that very sense of like, freedom, and like that we never felt that kind of imposter syndrome. But as we aged, those things would creep in. So I think, a simple way to kind of also, which I know maybe doesn't feel like it connects, but for me, I think it's really helped with my own journey. So hopefully it can help someone else too, is always coming back to kind of playful practices. So like a lot of times we take ourselves way too seriously and we don't really ever do things that kind of nourish that inner child of ourselves. So doing things that are playful that you may think that you are silly for doing, or that feels really immature. But those practices actually really help you to kind of break loose some of that stuff that's stuck within you. And it can just be like, if you're a person that likes to dance, just dancing without, like the saying, dance like no one's watching, little practices like that. Or like just, I don't know, like there's been a lot of different seasons in my life where if I've come back to play, I've really come back to myself and come back to that place where I can kind of tuck away all those thoughts that society puts on us, of that we have to look a certain way or be a certain way. And that's the only way to kind of feel like we're being our best self, is if we're kind of putting on these masks. So yeah.
Yeah. I typically like to take vulnerable conversations and make them funny because I don't like vulnerability. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna go back to did you ever watch Friends? The TV
Yep.
show
Oh yeah.
Friends.
Yep.
Okay, do
Yep.
you
Totally.
remember the episode where Phoebe was like running funny and Rachel was like embarrassed to run with
Oh
her?
yes.
And
Yep.
Phoebe was running funny because she's like, it reminds me of when I was a kid. And it was
Yeah.
like, it was fun when I ran as a kid. And I felt like my legs were going to fall off, or like I was going to fly into the sky. And so I still
Yep.
run like that because it's
Yeah.
fun. And then at the end, Rachel joins her and they both run really funny.
Run like crazy
So
people.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's my way of taking this vulnerable moment and turning it into
Yeah.
something not vulnerable. But I love that show. And that just
Yeah.
reminded me of that when you're talking about doing things. And I'm like, I was thinking about how I could, incorporate that into my own life. And then that made me think of, when Phoebe was running funny.
Crazy. Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. And I mean, having kids in your life, like I have a kid who's
It's
not,
true.
he's 9,
Yeah.
really helps to bring that out
It
because,
does. Yeah.
yeah, because they're silly all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really interesting. It's something that we really don't do. We don't focus
No.
on um yeah, we don't focus on being silly or being kids. We're like, okay, we got to get our list done. At least when I grew up, it was all about like work before you play, right? It was always like that was the message, work
Yeah.
before you play. And so
Yeah.
now I'm like, well, I got to work before I play, but I mean, the work is endless.
Yeah.
So
It's always there. Yeah. And that's a thing. Like, I think, I have done some research around like if people take those moments either for play or for self-care, even if they're little pockets of time, um, you have this increased creativity, productivity. Like when we're talking about our careers, like when we can carve out those little moments in our lives where we think that they're a waste of time, you'll actually notice yourself showing up for work differently because you'll be able to have that clear mind and you'll kind of get rid of that imposter syndrome or that lack of confidence. Um, so I really think that there's value in it and we don't see it because life and society has conditioned us not to see that as a benefit. So yeah, but I think if a person was to really dedicate themselves to finding those little pockets, that it would really, you'll notice yourself showing up differently for work too. So
Hmm,
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So as we close out this episode, do you have some things that we can do to help, make our 2025 awesome?
Yeah.
Any strategic strategies that we can add to our life?
I think the first thing I would say is to not buy in that the new year has to be this very stressful time where you're trying to do all the things. It's the season of signing up for gym memberships and going to, fitting more, classes into your week that's already busy. There's always this new leaf turning around in January where I think people feel so pressured to do it, then it ends up being unobtainable or unrealistic. So I think keeping your expectations really low, to be honest, and I know that doesn't sound like very like an achiever mindset, but um it's those small steps that you can take. So I think that would be my biggest value is to, try not to be in that space of buying into all the busyness and craziness of trying to be everything for everyone and do all the things to improve yourself. Is just picking one area. Like we were talking about the 7 key areas of self-care, coming back to one area that you can slowly do some small change and see how that, be consistent with that. So I think it's picking one small thing and being consistent with that thing. And then as you feel like that thing has changed in your life or improved, then you can start on the next thing. So I think taking the busyness out of January is, I think, my biggest advice, to kind of take care of your own uh, spirit first and not being like expecting that you need to be doing all these other things that just is what you do in January. Yeah.
Totally. I love that message though, because, when I was younger, I always like set goals. I mean, I still do, but I always set goals for the new
Absolutely.
year. And
Yeah.
but then I would like, my goals would be like, my goals have changed and evolved as I've gotten older,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
at the beginning, they were like these big like goals that I had to like work really hard for. And then as they've like evolved, it's become more, these are the things that I want to keep doing. And then these
Yeah.
are the things I want to add or change or
Yeah.
whatever, instead of like these giant goals that usually don't accomplish because
Right.
they're not realistic in the first place. And then you're like disappointed by like January 31st, where you're like, oh, I failed again. Right. So
Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah. Creating something that's more sustainable
Yeah.
for the year so that you can
Yeah.
celebrate, and celebrating those wins when you do,
Yes, absolutely.
achieve something.
Yeah.
For anyone watching on YouTube, I just wanted to show my dog who was his little
I
paw
saw
was
him
in
there.
this
Yeah.
screen, so I thought I would just show him. He's really funny. He's
Happy.
just joining us today.
So cute.
Yeah. So, if people want to work with you or learn more about you, where can they find you? Where do you hang out?
Yeah, absolutely. I hang out on Instagram a lot. So it's Martina Health and Wellness. Or you can find me on LinkedIn under just my first and last name, Martina Wall. I'm on Facebook as well. Just under Martina Wall is where I post everything too. So, and then I also have my website, martinahealthandwellness.com. And yeah, that's where my spaces are. And then yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. We will include those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciated the conversation.
Thanks, Steph.